Sometimes, the people we hurt the most are the ones who least deserve it. I used to believe I was a good wife, loyal, caring, understanding. For nearly 20 years, my life with Robert had been quiet but stable. He was steady, predictable, always responsible. We weren't passionate like we once were, but we were safe. My name is Evelyn Miller, and this is the story of how I ruined my marriage, how I lost the only man who truly loved me. Robert worked as a renewable energy consultant, the kind of job that made him leave early and return late, buried in spreadsheets and technical calls. I worked as a translator for an international company, switching between French, German, and Spanish day after day. My life looked perfect from the outside: career, home, a faithful husband. But inside, I felt like a ghost moving through routine. Somewhere along the years, the laughter faded. We stopped holding hands. Our dinners turned into silent exchanges about bills, deadlines, and broken appliances. I didn't cheat because I hated him. I cheated because I wanted to feel something again. It began innocently enough. A few coworkers were going out for drinks after a long project, and one of them, Daniel Harris, a warehouse manager from the client's company, offered to drive us. He was charming in that effortless, reckless way. He laughed easily, complimented everyone, and when he looked at me, it felt like I was seen for the first time in years. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversation. Just attention. But it wasn't harmless for long. Soon, Daniel started texting me. Little things. You looked beautiful today. Can't believe you're married to an energy nerd. You deserve someone who actually listens. I should have stopped right there. But I didn't. I started dressing better, staying late at work, lying about deadlines. And every lie came easier than the last. Robert never questioned much. He trusted me, the way a man trusts the air he breathes. One Friday night, after a supposed work dinner, I found myself in Daniel's arms for the first time. I told myself it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Again and again, until guilt became part of my routine. A few weeks later, I started noticing subtle changes in Robert. He'd begun to look at me differently. Not angry, just observant. The kind of stare that makes your stomach twist. He still brought me coffee in the morning, still kissed me goodbye, but something in his silence felt sharp. I remember one evening he offered to pick me up from the office. I panicked and told him I was staying late on a European call. In reality, I was at Daniel's apartment downtown. When I came home past midnight, Robert was awake, sitting in the living room, reading quietly. He didn't ask where I'd been, just smiled faintly and said, "Long day." I lied again, and he nodded like he already knew the truth. Then the walls started closing in. My mother, Margaret, began acting cold toward me. My brother, Henry, who visited every weekend, suddenly stopped dropping by. Even my friends, people who used to invite me everywhere, grew distant. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I noticed how their voices changed around me, polite, but strained. One evening, I called my mother. "Did Robert say something to you?" She hesitated. "Evelyn, you know how much I love you. But if you're doing something you'll regret, stop before it's too late." My hands went cold. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." She sighed. "Yes, you do." After that call, I couldn't sleep. I started trembling whenever my phone rang, terrified that someone else knew. Daniel sensed it too. "You're too tense lately," he said one night. "Maybe you should tell him." "Tell him what?" I snapped. "That I threw away 20 years for something that probably doesn't even mean anything?" Daniel didn't answer. That silence said more than any words could. I began realizing he was never mine, not really. I was an escape from his dull routine, just as he was from mine. One evening, Robert came home early with flowers, lilies, my favorite. He smiled softly. "You've been working too hard. Let's go out tomorrow. Dinner at that rooftop place you love." My heart stopped. That was the same place Daniel and I used to go. Did he know? That night, I stared at the ceiling, guilt eating me alive. For the first time, I hated the sound of my own heartbeat. A week later, I broke down. Tears, shaking, the whole mess. "I need to tell you something," I said. Robert didn't react. Just listened. I confessed everything, the affair, the lies, the guilt. I begged him to hate me, to yell, to do something, but he didn't. He reached over, held my hand gently, and said, "Maybe we both changed, Evelyn. Maybe we can still fix this." That mercy broke me more than anger ever could. He told me he wanted to meet Daniel, to talk, man to man. I begged him not to, but he insisted. "If you want to rebuild trust," he said, "I need to understand who he is." So, against every instinct, I agreed. The next night we met Daniel at that same rooftop bar, the same table where everything began. I was trembling so hard my drink almost spilled. Robert was calm. Too calm. He talked politely, asked Daniel about his work, his hobbies. Then, mid-conversation, Robert looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I've known about this for 3 months. Every meeting, every text, every lie. I've seen it all." Daniel froze. I couldn't breathe. Robert continued, "I gave Evelyn a choice, me or you. And she chose me." He stood up, left a set of divorce papers on the table, and walked away without another word. Daniel left soon after, not even looking at me. I sat there alone, staring at the city lights, realizing my life had just ended, and I had no one to blame but myself. I tried calling Robert for days, but he never answered. When the divorce papers arrived, I signed them in silence. My mother refused to speak to me. My brother barely looked at me. Friends avoided me like I was contagious. Even Daniel stopped replying. Later I heard he'd been transferred out of state. I was left with an empty apartment, a ruined reputation, and the echo of my own choices. But I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Because the true punishment wasn't losing Robert, it was realizing what I had lost in myself. After the night at the rooftop bar, everything I thought I knew about myself and my life collapsed. When Robert walked away from that table, it felt like he took the air with him. For days, I lived in a fog. I would wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear him in the kitchen, making coffee like always, humming to himself. But the house was quiet, unbearably quiet. The silence had weight. It pressed on my chest, followed me like a ghost. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Robert didn't fight, didn't raise his voice, didn't demand anything. That somehow made it worse. We sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, strangers who once shared a life. His eyes were calm, detached. He had already let go. I wanted him to yell, to say something cruel, to make me feel less guilty. But he didn't. He simply signed the papers, thanked me for being honest, and left. Just like that, 20 years ended with a pen stroke. My mother, Margaret, stopped visiting. When I called, she said she needed time. "You didn't just betray Robert, Evelyn," she said. "You betrayed everything I taught you about love and loyalty." I wanted to defend myself, to say it wasn't that simple. But it was. I had cheated. I had lied. My brother Henry wasn't any kinder. When he came to collect a few things Robert had left behind, he barely looked at me. "You know," he said quietly, "Robert was the best man I ever met. I don't know what you were thinking." Neither did I. When the divorce finalized, I kept the apartment. It didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner whispered memories. The spot where we set up our first Christmas tree, the kitchen where he once danced with me barefoot at midnight, the couch where I told him I loved him the first time. Now it was just me and my guilt. Daniel tried reaching out once. A short text. "I heard it's over. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. He was transferred to another department soon after. Someone told me he was seeing someone new, a younger woman from his office. I didn't even feel angry. Just empty. I had destroyed my marriage for a man who moved on before the ink on my divorce papers had dried. Weeks turned into months. My phone barely rang. Invitations stopped coming. My reflection in the mirror looked older, heavier, not from age, but from shame. I started therapy. My therapist, a kind older woman named Dr. Reeves, listened without judgment. "You're punishing yourself," she said once. "You think guilt equals redemption. It doesn't. It just keeps you in chains." I nodded, but inside I didn't believe her. I deserved those chains. 1 year later, I heard Robert had moved to Seattle. A mutual friend mentioned he'd gotten a promotion, senior consultant, something big. He looks happy, she added softly. Really happy. I smiled politely, then cried in my car for an hour afterward. It's strange. I had once prayed for him to forgive me, to look at me with love again. But now, hearing that he was happy without me hurt even more. It meant I was truly replaceable. 2 years after the divorce, I wrote him a long message. I don't know why, maybe hope, maybe closure. I told him I was sorry, that I finally understood the depth of what I'd done, that I would give anything to undo it. He never replied. The message showed read. Then nothing. A few days later, I realized he had blocked my number. That night, I deleted all our old photos. Every anniversary picture, every vacation selfie. I told myself it was for healing, but really, it was because looking at them was unbearable. Life became small after that. Work. Sleep. Grocery store. Repeat. My mother eventually started talking to me again, but it wasn't the same. Our conversations were polite, cautious, like walking barefoot over broken glass. Henry would visit for holidays. Sometimes he'd bring up Robert in passing, not realizing how much it hurt. He's doing really well in Seattle, he said one Christmas. New company, lots of travel. Seems like he's really thriving. I just nodded. That's good. He deserves it. And I meant it. 3 years after the divorce, I ran into Claire, my old friend from work, at a coffee shop. She looked uncomfortable at first, but sat down. Robert seems happy, she said softly. He's with someone you know. A woman named Sarah, I think. They met at some sustainability conference. My heart sank. Oh, she's good for him, Claire added quickly, maybe to soften the blow. She's quiet, kind. A lot like you used to be. That last line cut deeper than she realized. That night, I sat by the window for hours, thinking about Sarah. I imagined her making him laugh the way I used to. I imagined him holding her hand in that gentle way, the way that once belonged to me. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of what I'd thrown away. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the version of myself that he had loved. For years later, I heard through mutual contacts that Robert had gotten married to Sarah. They'd had a small ceremony in Seattle. His ex-mother-in-law, my own mother Margaret, even attended. I didn't cry that day. I just sat quietly, holding the last photograph we ever took together, and whispered, I hope she never hurts you like I did. 6 years after the divorce, I learned they'd had a daughter, Claire Miller, named after my old friend, perhaps. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at the photo someone had shown me, Robert holding his baby girl, smiling wider than I'd ever seen him. And in that smile, I finally saw what peace looked like. He had healed. He had moved on. And I was still stuck in the wreckage I'd created. When my mother fell ill 2 years later, I attended the funeral after she passed. Robert came, too. He stood quietly at the back, respectful, distant. When it was over, I approached him. She always loved you, I said through tears. She was a good woman, he replied simply. She loved you too. For a moment it felt like old times, two people connected by history, not hatred. I wanted to tell him I was sorry again, that I never stopped regretting. But I didn't. Some wounds healed best in silence. 9 years after our divorce, Robert was happy, truly happy. Married, successful, a father. And me? I was still rebuilding. Slowly, painfully. Therapy, work, solitude. Then one day I met someone. His name was Paul, a quiet high school teacher. Kind, patient, and nothing like Daniel. He listened when I spoke, laughed at my dull jokes, and never made me feel small. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could deserve a gentle kind of love again. We started dating, slowly, carefully. He didn't know much about my past, and I didn't offer. I wanted to start clean, even if deep down I knew my heart still carried scars. When he proposed, I said yes. It wasn't the same kind of love I'd had with Robert. It was quieter, humbler. Maybe that's all I could handle now. On the day of our wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You can forgive yourself now." But forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It just softens the edges. I didn't invite many people, just close friends, a few colleagues, and Claire. She smiled as we cut the cake. "You look happy, Evie," she said. I nodded. "I am." But inside, I wasn't sure. Because sometimes, when life grows quiet, I still hear Robert's voice in my head, calm, patient, final. "Now we're even." And that's when I realize I never wanted to be even. I just wanted him back. Years passed. Seasons blurred into each other, and I learned how to live with quiet. Not peace, just quiet. I built a new life with Paul, my husband. We lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by tall oak trees and the constant hum of cicadas. He was kind, steady, and never once asked too many questions about my past. Sometimes I wondered if he sensed the ghost that slept beside him, the ghost of a woman who had once destroyed everything good in her life. Paul taught literature at a nearby high school. He would come home smelling of chalk and paper, talking about his students' essays and their wild, idealistic dreams. I listened, smiled, and cooked dinner while pretending not to think about another man who once came home talking about renewable energy, travel plans, and deadlines. Every time Paul laughed, I thought about how Robert used to laugh softer, deeper. Every time Paul touched my hand, I remembered how Robert's hands were rougher, warmer, more certain. No matter how many years passed, Robert's shadow followed me. Not in anger, in memory. I never told Paul the truth about my first marriage. I said Robert and I grew apart, that we both made mistakes. That was easier to say than the truth, that I had broken a good man and called it love. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the look in Robert's eyes the night he exposed everything. That calm, devastating look, not full of hate, but of finality. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd whisper into the darkness, "I'm sorry, Robert." He'd never hear it. But maybe forgiveness doesn't need to be heard. Maybe it just needs to be felt. 8 years after our divorce, Margaret, my mother, passed away. It was quick, cancer, the kind that doesn't wait for anyone. At her funeral, I saw Robert again for the first time in years. He looked older, yes, but in a graceful way. Happiness suited him. He had a calmness that only comes from peace, the kind of peace you earn by letting go of the past. He stood across the cemetery, holding his wife's hand, Sarah, the woman who gave him back the life I had taken. For a moment, our eyes met. He nodded politely. No anger, no resentment, just closure. When the service ended, I walked up to him, my voice trembling. "She loved you, you know. My mother. Even after everything." He smiled gently. "She was a good woman. She loved you too." And just like that, the moment passed, quiet, simple, final. I thought that would be the last time I'd ever see him. But fate had one more twist. A few months later, I was invited to my old friend Claire's house for a weekend. I hadn't seen her in a long time, not since before my second marriage. She had moved into a lovely cottage outside the city, surrounded by gardens and laughter. Paul was away visiting family, so I went alone. When I arrived, Claire hugged me like old times. "You look happy, Evie," she said, pouring us tea. I smiled, the kind of practiced smile I'd perfected over the years. "I am. Life's been good." I moved on. We talked for hours about work, about her kids, about the world. Eventually, the conversation turned, as it always does, to the past. "So, Robert," she said carefully, "I never asked what really happened between you two. It always seemed complicated." I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought she could hear it. Then I lied. Smoothly. Easily. Like I had practiced it 1,000 times. "He cheated," I said softly. "With someone from work. I found out, and I couldn't forgive him." Claire's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Evie, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I nodded, forcing a small tear to fall, not entirely fake, just misplaced. "It was a long time ago," I whispered. "I've moved past it." But in that moment I realized I hadn't. That lie tasted bitter. It sat heavy on my tongue all night as I lay in her guest room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I told myself it was harmless, that it didn't matter what story I told the world. But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't lied to protect Robert. I had lied because I couldn't bear to admit that I was the villain of my own story. The next morning, I walked outside into the garden. The sun was soft, golden, the air heavy with the smell of jasmine. I sat on a bench, watching the petals fall, and thought about him, Robert. Somewhere in another city, he was probably having breakfast with his wife and daughter. Maybe he was reading the paper. Maybe his little girl was asking him about the solar panels he worked on. Maybe Sarah was laughing at something small and ordinary. He was happy. And I was glad, truly glad. Because if anyone in this story deserved peace, it was him. I once thought regret was a punishment, something that would fade over time. But I've learned that regret doesn't go away. It just changes shape. It becomes quieter, softer. But it stays. Sometimes, when I pass by the old rooftop bar downtown, I still see us, me and Daniel, laughing under the city lights, too blind to see the storm we were creating. And sometimes I see Robert there instead, the man I used to love, walking away from the table where everything ended. In those moments, I whisper the truth only the night can hear. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped deserving you. Years later, as I sit here writing this, my hair grayer, my hands weaker, I realize this story isn't about betrayal or revenge or punishment. It's about a woman who mistook excitement for love, who mistook silence for peace, and who learned too late that some mistakes can't be undone, only endured. Robert found happiness again. He rebuilt, he thrived, he loved. And me? I learned to live with the echo of what I destroyed. The world thinks he cheated, that I was the victim. But the truth, the real truth, will die with me. Because sometimes it's easier to live with a lie than to face the kind of truth that never stops breaking your heart.